The story you're about to hear is not about a verdict. It's about a lawsuit, the allegations it raises, and the complex space where faith, power, and vulnerability intersect. At the center is a Grammy-winning gospel singer whose music reached millions, and a former assistant who says his search for spiritual guidance led him into something very different than he expected. What makes this case especially complicated isn't just who is involved, it's how mentorship, belief, and authority are described as becoming deeply entangled over time. And according to publicly filed court documents, one email may now play a crucial role in how this story is being examined. According to publicly available information, the lawsuit was filed in New York State Court by Giuseppe Corletto, who alleges that he was subjected to inappropriate and abusive behavior by Donnie McClurkin over a period of several years. McClurkin is a well-known figure in gospel music, a multi-time Grammy Award winner whose career expanded beyond music into ministry, authorship, and public speaking. For many, his influence was shaped not only by chart-topping albums, but also by his personal testimony. In his writing and public appearances, McClurkin openly discussed his childhood trauma and his faith-based journey, including his views on sexuality and spiritual transformation. Corletto says it was this message that initially drew him in. According to his account, he was a young adult struggling to reconcile his faith with his identity, and he believed McClurkin's story offered hope, understanding, and guidance. That belief, he says, led him to attend a church event in Long Island in the early 2000s, a moment he now describes as the beginning of a relationship he thought would be mentorship. According to Corletto's statements in interviews and the lawsuit, his early interactions with McClurkin appeared appropriate and supportive. He describes conversations focused on spirituality, healing, and personal growth, discussions that felt especially meaningful given their shared backgrounds and experiences. At that time, Corletto says he believed he had found someone who truly understood his internal struggle. However, the lawsuit alleges that over time, boundaries became unclear. What was initially framed as guidance and prayer is later described by Corletto as evolving into conduct he says made him uncomfortable. Conduct he now believes was part of a gradual pattern of manipulation. Importantly, these are allegations, and McClurkin has firmly denied them. Through his attorney, McClurkin has stated that the claims are categorically false, and that the lawsuit misrepresents the nature of their interactions. This denial is a central part of the story, because at this stage, the case exists within the legal process, not as an established finding of fact. According to the lawsuit, Corletto eventually began working as McClurkin's assistant, a role that allegedly created both professional dependency and emotional pressure. The complaint suggests that McClurkin was not only a spiritual authority, but also an employer, mentor, and public figure. Dynamics that, according to Corletto, made it difficult for him to speak out or leave. The lawsuit alleges that during this period, Corletto struggled with confusion, shame, and self-blame. These descriptions reflect themes often discussed by experts in power imbalance situations, particularly when mentorship, belief systems, and authority overlap. Again, these are claims presented by one side, and they are being contested. McClurkin's legal team maintains that no abuse occurred, and that the accusations contradict what they describe as the real facts. But as the years passed, according to the lawsuit, the relationship did not simply fade away. And that's where the timeline becomes especially important. One of the most significant elements cited in the lawsuit is an email allegedly written by McClurkin after a 2013 incident referenced in the court filing. According to the complaint, the message contains language expressing regret, self-criticism, and acknowledgement of inappropriate behavior. Corletto says that discovering this email years later had a profound impact on him, not as public proof, but as personal validation. He has stated that reading the message made him feel that his experiences were real and that his memories were not imagined. McClurkin's attorney, however, disputes the interpretation of the email and argues that it has been taken out of context. This disagreement over meaning and intent is likely to be central as the legal process continues. What happens next isn't just about one relationship. It's about how institutions, belief systems, and legal frameworks respond when deeply personal allegations surface years later. In the next part, we'll examine why this lawsuit was filed now, how changes in New York law made it possible, and what broader questions this case raises about accountability and healing. A key question surrounding this case is timing. According to publicly available court records, the lawsuit was filed under New York City's Gender-Motivated Violence Protection Law, a statute that temporarily extended the window for filing civil claims related to certain abuse allegations. This legal change was designed to give adults an opportunity to come forward even if the alleged events occurred many years earlier, acknowledging that trauma, fear, or power dynamics can delay reporting. Corletto's attorney has stated that this legal window made it possible to finally pursue the case in court, seeking accountability, closure, and financial compensation. It's important to note that filing a lawsuit does not establish guilt. It initiates a legal process where claims are examined, challenged, and tested under the law. At this stage, the court has not ruled on the merits of the case, and both sides maintain sharply different versions of events. During the years described in the lawsuit, Donnie McClurkin's public profile continued to grow. He performed at high-profile events, appeared alongside political figures, and remained a prominent voice in gospel music and ministry. Now, for supporters, McClurkin represented resilience, redemption, and faith-driven transformation. For critics, particularly within LGBTQ+ advocacy communities, his public statements on sexuality had already been controversial long before this lawsuit emerged. According to Corletto, this contrast between public image and private experience intensified his internal conflict. He has said that watching McClurkin's influence expand while privately carrying unresolved pain contributed to long-term emotional distress. Again, McClurkin disputes this characterization entirely, and his legal team emphasizes that public success should not be conflated with wrongdoing. This tension between reputation and allegation is one of the most challenging aspects for audiences to process. In interviews, Corletto has spoken openly about the emotional impact he says followed these experiences. He describes periods of depression, isolation, and confusion, not only about the alleged incidents themselves, but about faith, trust, and identity. According to his account, leaving the church did not immediately bring clarity or relief. Instead, it marked the beginning of a long period of rebuilding. Mental health professionals often note that individuals who experience alleged abuse in environments tied to belief or authority may struggle to separate personal identity from institutional influence. Corletto has said that distancing himself from efforts to change who he was allowed him to eventually find stability, family, and peace. These reflections are personal experiences, not legal conclusions, but they form a central part of why he says this lawsuit matters. McClurkin's attorney has strongly rejected the allegations. In public statements, the defense has said that McClurkin at no time engaged in abuse or coercion, and that the lawsuit presents a distorted version of events spanning decades. They argue that memories fade, interpretations shift, and that long-standing personal relationships can be mischaracterized when viewed years later. The defense also disputes the framing of the email referenced in the lawsuit, stating that it does not represent an admission of wrongdoing. As with many high-profile civil cases, credibility, documentation, and context are likely to play major roles as proceedings continue. At this point, the court has not determined whose account will prevail. Beyond the individuals involved, this lawsuit raises broader questions. How should institutions respond when allegations emerge long after the fact? What safeguards exist, or should exist, within mentorship and ministry structures? And how do belief systems influence silence, loyalty, or fear? These questions extend far beyond this single case, touching on accountability, power dynamics, and the responsibilities that come with leadership. For some, this lawsuit represents an opportunity for examination and reform. For others, it is a reminder of the importance of due process and restraint before reaching conclusions. Both perspectives coexist, and neither can be ignored. What happens next will unfold inside the legal system through filings, motions, and potential testimony, rather than headlines alone. In the final part, we'll look at what outcomes are possible, what this case may mean for faith communities going forward, and why stories like this continue to surface years later. One of the most complex layers in this case is the role of spiritual authority. According to the lawsuit, Corletto viewed McClurkin not just as a mentor, but as someone uniquely positioned to guide him through deeply personal spiritual struggles. That authority, he says, carried extraordinary weight. Experts who study power dynamics in religious settings often point out that faith-based mentorship can blur emotional boundaries, especially when guidance is framed as divinely inspired or spiritually necessary. Corletto alleges that decisions he made during this period were influenced by a belief that obedience and closeness were tied to his spiritual well-being. The lawsuit suggests that questioning or resisting felt, to him, like questioning faith itself. McClurkin's legal team rejects this framing, stating that spiritual leadership should not be mischaracterized as coercion, and that personal responsibility remains with the individual. This disagreement goes to the heart of the case. Was influence used appropriately, or was it misused? According to publicly available information, McClurkin has long spoken about his belief that Scripture helped him overcome same-sex attraction, a position that has been both supported and criticized over the years. Corletto says he entered these prayer-based sessions believing they were intended to help him spiritually. However, the lawsuit alleges that these sessions later became the setting for inappropriate conduct, a claim McClurkin categorically denies. What complicates this aspect of the story is how normalized these practices were at the time within certain religious communities. For many individuals seeking guidance, questioning the structure or intent of such sessions was not common, particularly when led by a respected spiritual figure. This context does not determine guilt or innocence, but it does help explain why Corletto says he struggled to interpret what was happening in real time. The lawsuit further alleges that as Corletto's role expanded, so did his proximity to McClurkin. According to the filing, he traveled frequently as an assistant, spending extended periods away from family, friends, and familiar support systems. This, Corletto claims, increased his sense of isolation. Legal analysts often note that isolation can intensify dependency, particularly when one individual controls access to work, community, and spiritual affirmation. Corletto has said that leaving was not as simple as resigning from a job. He believed that stepping away could mean losing spiritual guidance, community, and purpose all at once. McClurkin's defense disputes the notion that Corletto was isolated or dependent, arguing that he was an adult capable of making his own choices throughout their interactions. According to the lawsuit, Corletto attempted multiple times to distance himself from McClurkin. Each time, he says, conversations would follow that reframed his doubts as spiritual weakness or abandonment of purpose. Corletto has described being compared to biblical figures in mentor-disciple relationships. Language, he says, made departure feel like failure rather than self-protection. This type of framing, according to some trauma specialists, can create internal conflict where individuals blame themselves rather than questioning authority. Eventually, Corletto did leave and pursued a career outside the church. However, the lawsuit alleges that contact continued intermittently. A pattern, Corletto says, made it harder to fully separate emotionally. McClurkin's legal team again denies any wrongdoing and disputes the interpretation of these interactions. Leaving the environment did not immediately resolve the internal struggle. Corletto has said that stepping away from the church left him feeling unanchored, unsure where his faith ended and his own identity began. He describes periods of guilt, fear, and emotional exhaustion, not only from the alleged experiences themselves, but from years of trying to align himself with expectations he no longer believed were healthy. These reflections are not uncommon among individuals who exit tightly structured belief systems, particularly when authority figures played a central role. They are also deeply personal and not proof of wrongdoing, but they help explain why Corletto says it took years before he felt able to revisit what happened. At this point in the story, the legal case intersects directly with personal recovery, and with a moment years later that Corletto says forced him to re-examine everything he thought he had buried. Next, we'll go deeper into the rediscovery of the email, how memory and documentation interact in delayed legal cases, and why this moment became a turning point rather than an ending. According to Corletto, years after distancing himself from McClurkin and the church environment, he came across an email that had been sent following an incident referenced in the lawsuit. He has said that at the time it was originally written, he did not fully process its significance. Life had moved on, and revisiting the past was something he actively avoided. But when he encountered the message again years later, he says the language struck him differently. According to the lawsuit, the email contains expressions of regret and self-criticism that Corletto interpreted as acknowledgement of wrongdoing. For him, the message became less about the words themselves and more about what they represented, confirmation that his experiences were not imagined or exaggerated. From a legal perspective, such communications are often heavily scrutinized. Context, intent, timing, and surrounding circumstances all matter. McClurkin's legal team disputes Corletto's interpretation and argues that the email does not constitute an admission of abuse. This difference in interpretation illustrates how the same document can carry vastly different meaning depending on perspective, especially when viewed years later. Cases involving delayed allegations often raise questions about memory. Psychologists note that traumatic experiences are not always processed in a linear or immediate way. Some individuals recall events clearly, while others suppress or compartmentalize them for long periods. Corletto has said that for many years he focused on survival rather than reflection, building a career, forming relationships, and trying to create distance from a painful chapter of his life. It wasn't until later, he says, that he felt emotionally stable enough to revisit what had happened. Defense teams in such cases often argue that memory can be influenced by time, reinterpretation, or external narratives. Courts must weigh these competing realities carefully, balancing compassion for delayed reporting with the need for reliable evidence. This tension is not unique to this case, but it plays a central role in how it may ultimately be evaluated. One question frequently asked in cases like this is, why didn't someone speak up sooner? According to Corletto, the answer lies in fear. Not just fear of consequences, but fear of being wrong. He has said that he worried about damaging someone he believed was spiritually significant, about being blamed, and about losing his sense of belonging. In environments built around shared belief, raising concerns can feel like betrayal rather than self-advocacy. Sociologists studying religious organizations note that loyalty, hierarchy, and moral framing can unintentionally discourage reporting, even when no explicit threats are made. McClurkin's defense emphasizes that Corletto had opportunities to leave and seek help, reinforcing their position that no coercion occurred. These opposing interpretations highlight how power dynamics can be perceived very differently by those involved. According to Corletto and his legal team, the decision to file a lawsuit was not immediate, nor was it taken lightly. He has said that for years he did not believe legal action would bring clarity or healing. What changed, according to his attorney, was a combination of emotional readiness and legal opportunity. Specifically, changes in New York law that allowed older claims to be filed within a limited window. The lawsuit seeks financial compensation, but Corletto has also framed it as an effort to formally acknowledge his experiences within a structured process. From McClurkin's perspective, the lawsuit represents a serious accusation that he says is unfounded and damaging. Both positions now exist within the legal system, where arguments are presented through filings rather than interviews. As news of the lawsuit became public, reactions varied widely. Some expressed support for Corletto and praised his willingness to come forward. Others urged restraint, emphasizing the presumption of innocence and the importance of due process. Major news outlets have largely framed the story carefully, relying on court filings, on-the-record statements, and protective language. This cautious approach reflects the complexity of reporting on allegations, especially when no ruling has been made. For audiences, this can feel unsatisfying. There is no clear resolution, no definitive answer. But that uncertainty is part of responsible coverage. As this case moves forward, the outcome remains uncertain. Civil lawsuits like this one can end in several ways: dismissal, settlement, or a trial, where evidence and testimony are evaluated under legal standards. At this point, no conclusion has been reached, and the court has not ruled on the truth of the allegations. What is clear, however, is why stories like this continue to resonate. They sit at the intersection of deeply personal experience and public accountability, where faith, authority, and trust can shape decisions long before anyone considers legal action. For faith communities, this case may prompt reflection rather than judgment. How mentorship is structured, how power is balanced, and how concerns can be raised safely, without fear or pressure. For others, It underscores the importance of separating allegations from outcomes and allowing legal processes to unfold without assumptions. Giuseppe Corletto has said that bringing this lawsuit was not about public attention, but about closure, an attempt to place his experiences into a formal process after years of silence. Donnie McClurkin, through his attorney, continues to deny all wrongdoing and maintains his innocence. Both statements exist at the same time, and the truth, legally speaking, has yet to be determined. What remains after the headlines fade is a broader conversation about vulnerability, belief, and responsibility, especially when influence and guidance are involved. And that leads to a larger question worth considering. How do institutions built on trust evolve to protect the people who place that trust in them? That question, not a verdict, is where this story leaves us. If you want to explore how similar cases have shaped policy changes, accountability measures, and cultural conversations within faith-based organizations, the next video takes a closer look at that evolving landscape.